Okay, today we have Dr. Franklin Hayes. He received his PhD in biochemistry and biophysics from Oregon State University and completed postdoctoral training in membrane protein biophysics and structural biology at the University of California, San Francisco as an NIH NRSA Sandler Foundation Fellow. He is currently an associate professor in the Department of Nutritional Sciences and served as associate dean for research in the College of Allied Health. Dr. Hayes directs the Laboratory of Redox Biology, where his research integrates redox systems, nutrition, and membrane protein in structure function relationships to address questions relevant to human health, drug disposition, and translational science. In parallel, he has a strong interest in graduate education, research integrity, and the responsible adoption of emerging technologies, including generative AI and data science. His recent teaching and scholarship focus on the ethical use of artificial intelligence in biomedical research and training, with particular emphasis on rigor, transparency, authorship, and how AI can augment rather than replace scientific reasoning and discovery. You can go ahead, Dr. Hayes.
Great. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation to present at this pre-GREAT workshop. I would like to thank the organizers for GREAT. It's greatly appreciated. I know that there's a lot of work that goes into organizing the whole GREAT series. So this presentation is focused on the ethical use of AI. And so my objective is to really build a scaffold about what bounds ethical use of AI, focus on research and focus on OU Health Campus. But I've saved some time at the end, hopefully, for us to answer questions and maybe have a discussion about any sticking points. But feel free to just cue your mic and ask questions as I'm talking as well. All right. So the workshop's about the ethical use of AI in academic and research settings. So it's focused on research, really, but we're going to talk about the academic side as well. And the reality is that AI is no longer peripheral to a lot of the work that we're doing, whether that's teaching, scholarship, grant writing, data analysis, even institutional operations. We're seeing AI in some way, shape, or form that's integrating into our daily existence. And so what we should really be focused on at the moment is AI can empower you to increase productivity and accessibility, but there's significant risks. And there's a lot that AI isn't, and there's a lot that is really, really bad out, and in particular, generative AI. So I want to sort of lay a framework for that and talk about some of the institutional policies and procedures that really govern how one should approach, if they choose to, use generative AI in their work. So I'm not going to debate really whether AI should be used, because it already is. But the question is really about responsibility. So using it in ways that preserve rigor, that protect data, and maintain professional integrity. So concerning the time limitations and really the focus of this talk, I'm not going to go into some of the larger environmental and data privacy questions that surround generative AI in particular, though as valid as they are, right? So we're going to start with some perspective. Now, I didn't feel old before I made this slide, but I felt old after making it. I just turned 50 a few months ago. And so AI is often treated as something entirely new. But the term artificial intelligence dates back to the late 50s, when scientific workshops were being held on what it is and how it's going to evolve. And it goes back even earlier to the mid-early 40s, talking about the underlying theory of what we now call AI. So I think what really feels disruptive right now is the rate of acceleration of AI coming into the collective consciousness, in particular, since late 2022 and early 2023 with ChatGPT. So if you can look at the technologies that have been developed since I was born that really came online, you see that this is a pretty tremendous amount of change. So this rate of technological change isn't new to this period. We've been going through this rapid rate of development for the last century, since the late 1800s. And so generative AI is just really another one of those inflection points. But though it was a big shockwave, what makes this really distinctive is that generative AI is allowed to, it's generated a lot of ethical tension because it can simulate a human response, right? And so traditional AI has been used heavily in academic research and biomedical research and in research generally for decades. Now, traditionally, this is focused on pattern recognition and prediction, optimization. So it supported scholarship, and there was never really any major issues. You could use the scientific method and use rigor, for instance, in a deep learning or a machine learning approach, using neural networks to study a thing. And you can withhold data from your training set, and you can go back later and compare the model to that training, to that data that was withheld, for instance, like in cross-validation. And so the scientific method was really utilized heavy here. So it didn't create major ruffles like what we've seen with generative AI. So generative AI is fairly different in that it produces text, images, code, music, art, images. So these are artifacts that resemble human intellectual work and creativity. So it blurs the boundaries between what a human is producing. It blurs the boundaries with things like authorship. So it can fabricate plausible content, and it's widely accessible. So it's easy to access this content, right? So just go to a command line, you can generate output. So the core issue is this, is that analysis supports scholarship, whereas generation simulates it. So when AI output becomes indistinguishable from human-produced work, the ethical debate intensifies, and that's what we've seen happen. So this isn't really theoretical, it's measurable in the fact that we're seeing generative AI come into the academic arena. So here's one of many examples where the key point here is not really to look at the percentages. So this is papers that have been published in the peer-reviewed literature where there's clear evidence of detectable large language models that were used. So you see this key inflection point here that's around November of 2022 when ChatGPT was released. So the reality here is pretty clear that generative AI is already influencing scientific publishing. So the question is not whether or not it is present. I mean, it clearly is, but how is it being used and disclosed? So for anyone that's reviewing papers and reviewing grants over the last several years, or even looking at student work, you see that generative AI has made inroads. I've seen it clearly in every one of those arenas. So you see, this is a change in trajectory, right? Where generative AI, if we're just talking about publishing, which is only one aspect of what we do in the research enterprise, you see that there's this significant increase that's been happening. So what is acceptable use? Well, in early 2023, the big race was on to ban generative AI across the board. So Nature journals, science journals, NIH grant submissions, you see now that they're evolving rapidly and they're not in alignment with each other. So some allow limited editorial assistance, others prohibit substantial AI-generated content. NIH recently, as last fall, explicitly stated that AI cannot substantially be used to develop grant applications. So you see here, even just in Nature journals, they have a very limited scope that you can use it for assistance in copy editing. But then down below, you see that the editors, this editorial use, well, they can use it for summarizing data, for summarizing reviews, for key points, glossary of terms, for plain language summaries, for social media posts. So they're a bit more expansive in even what they're using it for. So you see this change is happening, this evolution is happening where generative AI is being accepted more, but it's being bounded in specific ways. And we'll talk about that. So this raises another issue, and that is who is navigating this complexity? Well, this is a very interesting survey that was recently released from the American Association of Colleges and Universities. And I have the URL right here, and I would encourage you to go look at this because it has some fascinating data in it that provides the faculty perspective on AI in higher education. And the first thing that stood out to me is getting almost 1,000 faculty members, 95% to agree on anything. For those of you, if any of you have sat through faculty meetings, that alone is pretty shocking. So these data are important because they capture the perception, not the speculation, from faculty across the US. And so what does this tell us? Well, first, faculty recognize the impact is inevitable from AI. Second, the concern currently outweighs the clarity. So faculty clearly looking at this data, looking through this whole report, faculty are significantly concerned, not just in the education arena, but in the research arena as well. And third, AI is already reshaping the teaching environment, whether we're ready or not. So the risk here is paralysis. If we focus only on what AI threatens, then we fail to define what responsible use looks like. And so that's been this shift that's been happening is how can we define responsible use of AI, right? And so that's where institutional leadership and literacy becomes very critical. But the next question I have for you really relates to that. And that is, which group do you feel is behind in AI literacy? Is it faculty or is it students? I've been asking this question. I've been talking to a lot of people the last several years on generative AI in particular in the education space. And I have a very clear answer to this question myself. So you don't have to answer, but answer to yourself what you think it is. And so empirical evidence clearly suggests that students are digital natives. They adopt AI tools more fluently relative to faculty. I am 50 years old. You know, when cell phones didn't exist when I was little, personal computers didn't exist when I was growing up. So it takes a lot of work to really get onto this change, whether I'm using it or not, to be able to accommodate what's happening in the AI space. So faculty report lower comfort and they require more training. And that is absolutely true here at OU as well. It's true on the Norman campus, it's true on the health campus. So the challenge here is that faculty often define what constitutes ethical use in higher education. So this creates a literacy asymmetry, okay? We are simultaneously, as faculty members, regulators and learners. So that's a challenging position to be in, right? And this conflict has been borne out in a big way across the entire OU enterprise. And there's been significant strides in it, but it's been a real challenge. So students are trained in a curriculum-driven system. So this is determined by the curriculum and by accreditation, say if you're in a professional program. So faculty are involved in training and teaching students. And so the structure around this, we call the curriculum. Now, the difference here is that employers, they're focused on skills. So employers hire students after they graduate based on a skill set. And the reality is that AI literacy is rapidly becoming a workforce expectation, particularly in data-driven professions. But accreditation cycles and curriculum reform move very slowly. So balancing these two responsibilities has been a real challenge. So what's my perspective on AI use? Well, I use AI tools. I never really trust the output. Does it save time? Sometimes, often not. And do I think that AI use is always ethical? It depends, and we're going to define what that means when we're talking in this seminar, all right? So AI can do some things really great, but it does some things really, really poorly. For instance, scientific writing from scratch, right? So responsible augmentation is the framework. AI increases velocity, but it doesn't transfer responsibility. And that's the key ethical punchline. that it doesn't transfer responsibility. So first, let's look at the definition for rigor, and this is NIH's definition for rigor. Strict application of the scientific method to ensure unbiased design, analysis, and reporting. So rigor constrains error, whereas velocity amplifies it. And where do we tend to get velocity from? Well, generative AI, that's one of the key benefits, is increased velocity, doing things quicker. So if AI accelerates output without increasing oversight, we amplify error faster than ever before. And we've seen that in the published literature, and I have an example coming up. So that's the central risk in biomedical research, right? So if we talk about this idea of expediency versus reputation, so someone that's using AI, and you can even imagine doing something in the lab, which one of these is more important? And hopefully we would agree that reputation is more important relative to expediency. As a PI, I really love expediency. I want data now, but not at the cost of my reputation, which can be one bad publication, right? Now, what about reputation versus rigor? So reputation versus rigor. Reputation is perception, whereas rigor is method. If we protect reputation without protecting rigor, so we're managing optics, not science. And AI can make that temptation stronger because it produces polished output that looks rigorous, but it can be completely fabricated. So rigor has to anchor the system. If rigor drops, then AI amplifies the error. If rigor remains high, then AI can amplify productivity safely. So the real question generally is not should we use AI, it is what governs its use. Its use, speed, image, or method, all right? And the core argument here is that rigor is the defining focus. Right, so would you use this calculator? It's a pretty straightforward question, and obviously we'd probably all say nope, it doesn't work. Pretty simple math, it's giving the wrong answer. But would you use a calculator? And this is part of the classic calculator debate. And we all would probably say yes, absolutely. But this same debate happened with calculators that we're seeing with generative AI. The idea here is that generative AI is not inherently good or bad, but it is absolutely not uniformly reliable. So you have to verify output, right? So the onus is on the user to verify output. The same thing is true if you do a Western. The onus is on the experimenter to verify that the output is true. So where does AI, generative AI, perform well and where does it fall short? So generative AI overperforms in structure-driven tasks, shown here on the left. Right, so coding scaffolds, outlining, reformatting, reorganizing notes, right? So the model recognizes structure and it reproduces it effectively. So that's where it can meaningfully increase productivity. But where does it underperform? So scientific writing, for example, is not just grammar, it's an argument. There's restraint, there's precision. Accurate data visualization requires judgment about scale and distortion and interpretation, okay? So these are not formatting problems. They're really epistemic problems. They require knowledge and experience and rational thought. So this is a key distinction. Generative AI is strong at execution, but it's weak at evaluation. So if you let it operate in the execution space, it can accelerate things. But if you let it operate fully in the reasoning space without oversight, it will confidently generate errors. And that's a big crux of the ethical debate that happens with generative AI. So the rules are simple. Use it for structured thinking, not to replace thinking. Right, so one of the biggest misconceptions is that AI is simply a drafting tool, which it's not. So it intersects with every stage of the research lifecycle, and that's shown here, all the way from doing initial literature reviews, all the way to peer review of a resultant manuscript. So notice what changes across these stages. The risk profile shifts. It's not just one ethical issue. It's multiple stages of specific vulnerabilities. So this is why a blanket AI is allowed or AI is prohibited policy is insufficient. Ethical clarity has to be granular. So what is acceptable for formatting may be unacceptable for interpretation. What is appropriate in brainstorming may be inappropriate in statistical analysis. So AI doesn't just affect the output. It does alter the entire pathway, right? So this gets into the idea of the prompt. Okay, so AI output's not simply a function of prompt quality. There's a lot of this focus on the prompt in generative AI. And it's true that if you have a crappy prompt, so this is a really poorly structured prompt, you're likely going to get a poorly structured result. And there's certainly those that say, oh, generative AI is always terrible, terrible results. And they may fall into this category here where it comes back to prompt design, right? But really, what the output quality is about is the prompt, the model architecture, and the context, right? So even with the same prompt, you may not get the same output because these systems are probabilistic. They're not deterministic. So this is simply trying to do a statistical prediction on what comes next. What's the next token in the pipeline, right? Now, on top of that, models update silently, training data are opaque. There's minor wording changes, even taking a the out can shift the response substantially, right? So in biomedical research, this really matters quite a bit. You can have an amazing prompt and get a really great result, but you can also have an amazing prompt and get a really bad result. If you use AI for literature synthesis or code generation, statistical interpretation, what have you, you are accountable for the accuracy and the rigor of the result. So prompt engineering can improve the structure and efficiency, but verification still remains a human responsibility. So in this instance, you see that velocity can increase, but it doesn't replace the user responsibility to ensure accuracy and relevance. And most of the challenges I see that users have with generative AI and the quality of the work is related to not the model that they're picking, but how they're building and utilizing prompts. Right, so how about here at OU? So the OU HC policy for AI use in the academic context is pretty clearly defined. It is specifically defined in the student handbook. And you see that it really comes back to read the syllabus. So the default in coursework settings is that it's generally not allowed unless it's specified and disclosure is required. And that policies vary across campus, and that change is anchored in the syllabus. I will tell you that some faculty at OU absolutely refuse and do not want any AI use in their classroom. Other faculty members, it's a total open door. You can do whatever you want to do, don't even have to disclose it. And then everything in between, and all of those positions have generated problems in some way. But the reality is, from a student perspective, is that you have to read the syllabus, and faculty must clearly state expectations. So in this instance, ambiguity creates risk and transparency prevents it. Now, what about in a research context? Well, it gets more complex because in this instance, the default is you're responsible. There's no specific mention of artificial intelligence, quote unquote, in the faculty handbook when it comes to research misconduct. But that policy still covers it very clearly because of fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. So in this instance, the onus, the responsibility is on the user to ensure the accuracy of what they're producing, they're claiming and stating as their work. Now, OU has issued formal research guidance on this with this AI at OU. You can find this document at this link, and I would encourage you to check this document out, where users are accountable for all AI output they integrate into their work. So AI can catalyze innovation, but ethical integrity must co-evolve. And so do you see now that these policies are living documents and they're starting to evolve and specify what the responsibility is? This goes a step further in this document, this section here, which I thank Dr. Stout for sharing with me, that there's operative language in OU's research guidance, and I highlighted it here because I think it's an important section shown here. The policy does not single out AI as inherently unethical. So what it's addressing is the misuse, particularly fabrication, falsification, or inappropriate manipulation of data images. So if AI contributes to those outcomes, even indirectly, the responsibility remains with the researcher. But I want you to notice the phrasing here. Intentional, knowing, or reckless use. Reckless is the key word. That means failing to verify output, failing to review AI-generated code, failing to confirm that figures reflect real data. That can rise to the level of a policy violation, and there's many other examples. So the other critical point here is authorship accountability. Authors must assert that their output does not contain plagiarism. This can be almost impossible with some generative AI models. So disclosure and verification are not optional. They are part of the research integrity. So the takeaway here isn't really to avoid AI. If AI touches your data, your figures, or your text, that you own the consequences, all right? So we're seeing this evolve in the space of publishing in the literature, right? So major editorial bodies, in particular the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, which is a really big one here, they are refining and defining what it means. And for instance, there's a coalescence around generative AI chatbots cannot be co-authors on papers, right? Now, what about with PHI? So we see here that authorship cannot be delegated, right? So you are responsible for what you produce. But now this has been an issue that's popped up not just at our university, but other universities when it comes to protected health information. So what about PHI? So when it comes to PHI, the default position is not to be careful. The default position is do not use AI tools with PHI. So the default here is never, unless clearly consented. And you would want this in writing. So you must follow the minimum necessary rule. And that's explained here further by Valerie Golden, which is our HIPAA security officer on campus. That is it necessary for my job to share PHI with Copilot? If it is not necessary, it is not permissible to include PHI with the application. Now, this extends to things like Zoom, which have generative AI platforms built into them now, where PHI cannot be gathered or entered unless there's explicit consent has been obtained in advance. So the practical question here is defined down here, but really the default for PHI is that it should never really touch generative AI unless it's on very specific and uniquely defined situations. Now, Copilot is mentioned here, and the university has an enterprise license with Copilot. So if you log in with OU credentials, then Copilot provides enterprise data protection. What that means is that what you enter isn't being used to train the model. However, there's still access beyond you. So access to the data included in prompts and chats through Copilot are accessible to the user and OUIT for administrative logging purposes only. So the default really should be when using a generative AI tool, like posting something to Instagram or to Facebook or Snapchat, you lose control of it once you kick it out there, unless you have a totally firewalled internal model that you've built yourself and is sitting on your server. Something like, say, Hugging Face, where you build it yourself. All right, so here's the crux of the talk. So this is operational filter here. Before you use AI, in any academic or research setting, one should run something like this for a test. And there's different examples of this. This is one that I use. Is it allowed? And so allowed is sort of institutional. Does the syllabus permit it? Does the journal allow it? Does the sponsor restrict it? If the answer is unclear, then you pause and check on the policy. So policy isn't an optional thing, right? Is it appropriate? This is more professional judgment. Even if something is allowed, is it the right cognitive task to outsource? Is it brainstorming or is it drafting something from scratch like a specific aims page? Grammar polishing is different from generating mechanistic interpretation. Two very different things. Is it attributable? This is more about transparency. And some journals, I'm going to show you an example, are requiring this now. If AI materially influenced the work, it should be disclosed. If AI touched your data, it should be disclosed, right? So hidden use erodes trust, and trust is really the currency that we have in academia. And then finally, this is the biggest one, this is rigor. So is it accurate? You are responsible for verification. This includes citations, statistics, figures, you name it. Every output must be checked against primary sources. So if you fail one of these 4 A's, then the default is not to use it. So this is a framework that forces deliberation instead of convenience when using AI, right? So it's not a reactive, it's a structured and intentional approach to using generative AI. Right. So there's a Canvas 101 course now that's set up when we talk about training for students. And so graduate students should have access to this. If you don't, then I would say contact Nathan, who's sitting there in the audience, or the graduate college, or you can contact me and I can get you access to the course. And this talks about ethics. It talks about fundamentals, policy alignment, practical examples for prompt building. So the goal here isn't restriction. It's focused on skill development without compromising rigor. And at the beginning of the talk, I said that faculty were lagging behind students. We have the same thing, it's not released yet. We're building the same thing for faculty. So there's going to be a faculty 101 AI module that's going to be coming online as well. So I just have a few slides left here. And so now we're talking about what must be logged. So if Gen AI meaningfully contributes to research output, it has to be documented, right? This is protected. And so several of those things are shown here. Journals now are requiring this. They're stating it very clearly to document whether the output was edited and how it was verified. Some journals don't, if it's just simple editing, they don't require you to disclose that. Others do. So the underlying principle here is reproducibility. If the investigator cannot understand how AI shaped the analytical pathway or shaped the final product, then you've introduced some opacity to the work, and that's really a challenge. Now, I show here a volcano plot from RNA-seq data. We're seeing all these high content, like volcano plots, RNA-seq data. They all seem like they're in almost every paper. This is completely fabricated. I generated it in cloud. Now, I want to make a point here that this represents the different types of approach and how, like, I would personally use generative AI. I would never take an Excel spreadsheet that outputs all of these results and dump it into generative AI and say, give me a volcano plot. You're asking for a world of hurt. You can easily just do that in R. You can make better figures, do better analysis, etc. What I would do is looking at this, identifying top fold changers, stick that list in and say, give me some framework for understanding this, like some brainstorming sessions, and then use that interactive session to go to the primary literature to try to understand maybe what some of the meaning is behind this. Something that you might do, say, in pathway analysis, for example. Right, so you must log how you use it generally, but this is different across journals. So I show some top journals here, JAMA, Lancet, Elsevier, Cell journals. They have different approaches to how you must disclose and whether or not you can use generative AI and how you can use it. So for example, here's a statement that Cell journals use. So like during the preparation of this work, yada, yada, name the tool, name the service, name the reason, etc. So you're seeing this more and more in the acknowledgement sections, and if it impacted the data, you're seeing it in the methods sections for papers. Right, so I have 2 slides left. Those of you that took Journal Club with me, you've seen this slide before. This is a classic example of how researchers get into trouble. And I just looked yesterday, this is a paper talking about rats, and this is a figure from the paper. The paper itself is equally terrible, but as of yesterday, it had almost 500,000 article views and 50,000 downloads. But interestingly enough, only 31 citations. So I don't know if it's insulting that it has 31. It's been retracted, and the paper itself is equally as bad as this figure, or if I should be impressed that it got 31. But the point here is that there are common examples where people are getting into trouble with using generative AI. Most researchers, I believe, don't intend to commit misconduct. There's certainly some of those, but the problem is over-reliance. AI-generated figures is a classic example. It's an easy visual example. References that don't exist is another common one, right? So many of these examples aren't really malicious. They're convenience-driven, right? So pasting reviewer comments into AI, that's a strict no-no almost any place that you review, at least any place that I've reviewed for. But it's important to understand that not knowing isn't a defense. If you look at the research misconduct policies for university, not saying I didn't know isn't a defense. If your name is on the paper, you own the content, right? So including what came from a model. And we see in this example, doesn't make any sense. There's words here that they're not words, all right? You see stuff like this popping up more and more. So AI generated figures, in my experience, generative AI is terrible at producing publication quality figures. Absolutely terrible. Non-existent or incorrect references, entering PHI. This can cause major problems. Copy pasting reviewer comments into AI, using AI to draft complete papers and peer reviews, using it to write manuscripts, analyzing research data and trusting what it gives you straight off, all right? Tone masking inaccuracies, saying with absolute confidence that something is 100% a fact. You tend not to see language like that in a scientific paper, but this confidence tone masking is pretty common with AI output, generative AI output. All right. So what this really shows is that rigor, not speed, has to remain the governing principle. All right. So AI doesn't fabricate alone. It fabricates because we as a user fail to verify. Right. So this is my last slide. And it's some parting thoughts. So AI increases velocity, but it does not transfer responsibility. And we see some of these key really vignettes here about generative AI use in a research setting and also in an academic setting. And some of these have been areas that students and faculty have gotten in trouble on our campus and other campuses. And you can look in the literature and find examples, not from our campus, I'll say that. But it's really important to keep some of these facts and points in mind, because I would argue that some of them are fairly fact-based, right? One of the most important ones is that ethical use isn't about avoiding detection. I see this with students. Every semester since spring of 2023 in my classes, I've identified generative AI use by students that didn't declare it and then denied it, all right? I've seen, I don't know how many papers in the last couple of years where I've seen examples as well. So it's not about avoiding detection. I actually encourage AI use in my classes. You just have to declare it and we can have a conversation about it. But most of my work is done in class if we're talking about the academic side. So really the key here is about building professional integrity as being the backbone for the identity, right? Because this is the real currency for our existence in academia. All right, so with that, we started a little late, but we have some time for questions. If there's questions or general discussion points here, particularly around gray zones or real world scenarios like institutional interpretation. I mean, I can see people better.
Hi, Dr. Hayes. That was a very interesting talk. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
I was curious as to where we stand with respect to patentable work that is very relevant to the university's mission. I know you described the guidelines from NIH, the AI policy on campus, but if you're using AI tools that ultimately leads to something that is patentable, how does that feel?
Well, so this is, first off, this is an incredibly complex question. Because there are a number of active lawsuits with, for instance, with ChatGPT and OpenAI. And I point this out because there, even if you delete what you're inputting, there is a retention right now as part of a discovery process associated with these lawsuits. So part of the debate about patentable work and generative AI being used to influence that would be the degree to which it influenced it, because you can't distill the output from generative AI as far as its uniqueness relative to its training data set, because we don't know what the training data sets are for most of these big models. It's true for Copilot as well. So I would say that this is a really complex question that gets into some legalese that I would prefer not to get into details on. And the other is, and don't know about, and the other is that there's very active, this is a very active space in terms of lawsuits and what counts as a disclosure and what counts as a contribution in terms of the novelty of that work. And I will say, as it relates to a publication, if I put something into, say, cloud, and it gives me a new pathway, and then I go on and I discover something, I patent something on that pathway, I'm not aware of a scenario where the investigator has declared that. So I'm not sure that this has been tested, because the investigator would probably say, oh, I thought of this on my own. So I don't know how that shapes. I do know that they're talking about it actively on campus in terms of what constitutes a disclosure. And generally, I think the response has been you stay firewalled as much as possible.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I don't know how to word my question, but me as a third year PhD student, sometimes when I'm writing papers, so my first language is not English, and when I write a paragraph, I use ChatGPT and I say, hey, can you make sure I don't have any grammatical errors and keep the academic tone? And after it writes for me, I compare the two paragraphs, the one I wrote and the one ChatGPT wrote, and the one it wrote, it's so much fancier and better, and I really want to use that, but I know it will cause me trouble. What should I do in these situations? Do you have any suggestions?
First, I would say, this is an excellent use for generative AI, and journals and publishers are seeing this, because if you spent any time reviewing, a major challenge is great science that's submitted from non-native English speakers. And so there's professional editors and the whole systems in place to try to help them polish the English. So I would say in your instance, and journals are starting to accept this as well. So in your instance, I would caution you about putting an entire paragraph. And I would distill it further into sentences. And so you can really look at the structural changes, because the output from a lot of these generative AI models, they tend to, they may sound very good and use big words, and they may have M dashes and like to list things, et cetera. But after a bit, the structure is pretty obvious. And really scientific writing is about sharpness and focus and being concise but having good narrative flow. And these are things that generative AI can really struggle with. So I would caution about putting an entire paragraph, because it can shift it away from your personal voice in a big way. But putting in sentences and work on refining a sentences and then building it up in that way. But I think what you're using it for is a really good use case for generative AI. And there's plenty of There's published data about this. You see the journals are shifting on this as well. And many of the postdocs on our campus are non-native English speakers. And so this is proving to be beneficial for them, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes. So like my question is similar to hers, but like in my case, like I use ChatGPT more or less the same way. And like last semester, I was writing something. I go through ChatGPT to fix it and like make it look better because also English is not my first language. And at the same time, I was taking the scientific writing class. And in that way, we were like working on how to use dashes to make emphasis and ideas and stuff. And ChatGPT gave me some ideas and put it like between dashes. And when I read it, I change some parts and I decide like that part makes sense to put it between dashes. And when I showed to my PI, she said, oh, you just put that in ChatGPT and give it to me. And it's like, yes, but I like we're after that. And her only argument was because I use dashes. So now I'm afraid to just use dashes in my text because people are going to say I'm using AI even when I'm not.
Well, I would say that for one, you can take and put something in a generative AI and say, write 2,000 words. And you put that into these AI detectors and it says, 100% match. But then you just go to Google and you put in humanizer. And there's lots of websites that do this and take that exact output and put it into a humanizer and then feed it back into those same systems. And they're going to come back and say 100% human. You can't look at writing and say, absolutely, that something is generative AI. Now, there's some telltale signs. I mentioned the M dashes, and that's true. But I think the focus is you just want to produce the best writing possible. And if it's still in your voice and it's still your mental, if you have put the knowledge into it and you're focused more on structure and grammar and flow, I don't see where there's a problem with that. And if anything, I've seen that it can be a very beneficial process for someone who doesn't natively write in English. So in this instance, if your mentor says, well, you put it into ChatGPT and you just gave it to me because of some M dashes, I mean, mentors aren't always correct. But you can, my writing style has changed a little bit because I don't want it to look like something that's come from ChatGPT or from generative AI. And unfortunately, one of the low-hanging fruit is this M dash thing, but that's changing as well. Like Cloud has shifted away from that. ChatGPT hasn't. The recent models of ChatGPT have not. So I would just focus on you learning to write the best that you can. And if it's a tool that helps with that, then keep using it.
Thank you.
Hey, I know you.
Hi.
Hi.
All right. I have a question regarding the AI detector. I've tried it. So, Annie, I take a AI generated text, and also I also tested my own text, but actually the AI detector is not 100% accurate. So I'm not sure what to do in this case because even my own writing is gonna be detected as like AI or kind of like some AI detector give you like result as like AI human blend. I'm not sure what that is, but it's kind of like hard to test the AI detector. Can you speak about that?
AI detectors are worthless. They're inaccurate. They're not a means to be able to pull someone into your office and say, or so forth, say that this is AI generated. Matter of fact, faculty have gotten into significant trouble with this, and on our campus as well. And nationally, there's been lawsuits for this. There's been some faculty fired over this, making accusations of academic misconduct solely based off of GPT-0 and these AI detectors.
Mm.
Now, you don't want to generate, here's the difference. Like, I can't go to ChatGPT and say, write this specific games page, because it will be crap. It's just going to be crap. If I was to look at it and review it relative to me writing it from scratch, it's just not good. And there's some faculty on campus that are amazing writers, like say Zachary Pope over in the public health, HPRC, outstanding writer. Okay, but you get that way through practice and through working to refine it and experience it. And ChatGPT and Copilot, these are great tools to iteratively refine and improve your writing style. But I would caution you, don't put entire sections in. Go sentence by sentence and then ask, how is it changing? Why is it better? So work on refining your writing skill to make it better, because ultimately you're going to surpass what the current models can produce.
Right.
And if what you're writing is constantly being flagged as AI generated, well, I don't know what to say about that. I haven't really seen it. The biggest thing I'd say about AI detectors is that NIH they're clearly using detectors. They put out some NOTs, they put out some documentation saying back as early as 2024, they know like 1.6% of grants or something had some AI text in them, et cetera. They're clearly using something internally. And in the current state of things, I don't know how much faith I have in what that is and how accurate it is. But I know I have 2 R01s pending right now, and I've used generative AI to help refine the wordsmithing in sections or with my timeline at the very end. And they haven't been kicked back. The science is me. The core structure is me. Okay?
My other point is creating like a graph, or not a graph, but creating a scientific figure for your paper, or like a dissertation. I know like ChatGPT is crap and other AI tool, but there is like a figure. I think that there's like an AI called Figure Lab, which is, I think I heard a lot of like academic influencer recommending that. So doing our like creating one by using that AI, is it still like acceptable, or is there like
Well, you're creating a figure, which I assume is going to be for publication. And so my answer would be no, it's not acceptable. In particular, because if I've in the last week, I just sort of updated my knowledge on this, and you go through and read the instructions to authors in a lot of journals, and they are specific. They're evolving on the writing and helping with the writing and the English language and so forth. But I haven't seen much evolution in terms of with figures. So many of the journals still explicitly state you cannot use generative AI to make figures. And in particular, I can send you a huge stack of retracted papers, AI generated figures like the one with the large scrotum rat that I just presented, that are complete nonsense, because in 2023 and 2024, there's a big dump in the literature. I mean, there's a lot of crap in the literature already. For those of you who took my journal club, you know this. But there's a big dump in the literature of these AI generated figures that are total nonsense. So I think the journals are maybe a bit apprehensive to loosen up on that. BioRender has a figure service. You can send them the details and actually generate great figures for you. BioRender's gotten very, very popular. We'll start seeing AI integrated into that, I'm sure. And there's these other services, and actually do a pretty good job. But I would say don't do it now, because the journals explicitly say no. And if you find the journals that allow it explicitly, then please email me. I would be curious to know.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
Hmm. All right, so any other questions?
Okay. You don't have any questions? I think.
All right, great. Thank you very much. It's 8 p.m. here, so it's time for dinner. If you have any questions, please email me. And this was recorded, but I'll be happy to share my slides as well. Right, bye.